Number 8. Capuchin mummies. It's not uncommon for archaeologists to uncover crypts beneath monasteries. Over the years, plenty of people get buried underneath old monasteries and abbeys, but the discovery of catacombs under the Capuchin monastery in the Czech Republic wasn't the only surprise laying in wait for investigators. In the medieval crypt, multiple bodies of monks were found undisturbed, but surprisingly, they weren't placed inside coffins. Keeping with traditional burial practices, the monks were known to remove the bodies of their dead brothers from their coffins and place them on the ground so the next to be buried could be laid to rest. Hundreds of years ago, the brothers at the monastery started to bury their dead this way, with the practice continuing into the late 18th century. Instead of the traditional burial you and I are accustomed to, the bodies are placed with a stone slab under their head to prop them up. With their hands crossed over their bodies clutching a rosary, they are left to rest in this natural way. When they were discovered, some of the monks were still dressed in their ceremonial robes. But you might wonder how the bodies remained this way without decaying, right? The underground chamber has a system of ventilation ducts that allows the bodies to mummify, as well as soil that helps to keep the mummies from decaying. Although it might seem like a strange way to honor their dead, over time, 200 monks and followers of the religious order have been interred there. Of course, some of the bodies have been moved over the centuries, and now only 24 remain in the crypts. Number 7. Spiral skeletal burial. Dead bodies being placed in odd patterns are always unsettling, and recently 10 skeletons found in a burial site south of Mexico City were discovered in a particularly strange formation. Laid to rest in an archaeological site called Tlalpan, the bodies were found buried in a spiral, probably as some sort of religious or spiritual exercise, but for us today, it's just plain creepy. The bodies belonged to adults, a child and an infant, and were both female and male. Believed to be part of a ritualistic burial, they were arranged in a circular formation with their arm bones interlocked. 2 of the skeletons were found to have deformities in their skulls, with some of their teeth also deformed. I wonder if they had good dentists back thousands of years ago in Central America. Probably not. As experts studied their finds, they discovered the site dated back to the pre-classical period in Mexico, older than the Aztec Empire. An archaeologist who was part of the team that found the bodies in 2006 said the village associated with the burial lasted about 500 years, placing it between the Ticoman and Zacatenco phase in Mexico's history. Besides being bizarre and looking a bit occult, this strange find offers a unique glimpse into the burial practices of some of Mexico's first people, which has been very informative for archaeologists and anthropologists. Number 6. Peruvian sacrificial tunnel. Leave it to tiny robots to uncover one of the biggest discoveries tied to ancient Peru. A team of American and Peruvian archaeologists using tiny robots to search an ancient complex stumbled upon a network of tunnels below the 3,000-year-old Chavin de Huantar temple in 2018. But the tunnels weren't the only discovery made in the religious and administrative center. 3 skeletons, believed to have been victims of sacrifice, were also uncovered. Armed with cameras, the robots, which were designed by engineers at Stanford University, were sent into the underground tunnel network, where they found the bodies as well as ceramic fragments and tools. A whopping 35 tunnels make up the underground system, dating back to between 1200 and 200 BC. Considered one of the most important discoveries of the last 50 years, the tunnels were said to have been used by priests to carry out rituals using noise and light to make it seem like they had mystical powers. Using remote controls to maneuver the robots, researchers found the bodies belonging to a small boy, a teenager, and a young man. Located in a narrow valley in the high Andes, the Chavin Temple is a protected UNESCO World Heritage Site that was first occupied around 5,000 years ago. But the tunnels were a marvel of innovation, with optical illusions, mirrors, and even psychoactive drugs used to influence visitors that their priests were godlike. Sunlight, roaring water, and elaborate stone carvings also brought an extra air of the supernatural to peasants who came from miles away to experience spiritual enlightenment. Even if some of it was a smokescreen, the important thing is that the site brought power and authority to the Peruvian people, and it would never have been found without the clever use of modern technology. Number 5. Kenyan burial mound. Most massive burial monuments are dedicated to kings or pharaohs, but a newly discovered burial mound in Kenya was made by the people for the people, with bodies of tribe members of all ages buried side by side. Known as the Lothagam North Pillar Site, the mound is one of the earliest monumental sites in Eastern Africa. Made up of rocky rings, stone columns, and burial mounds, the site is home to generations of tribe members, roving herders who buried their dead by a lake in what is now Kenya. The oldest of 6 known monument sites built between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, the cemetery has a 100-foot wide raised stone platform site capped with monolithic basalt and sandstone columns that experts believe were hauled from nearly a mile away. Inside the platform, a burial chamber that once held up to almost 600 graves was also found. First discovered in the 1960s, the site had been studied for decades, uncovering the bodies, which were buried with colorful jewelry, hippo ivory bangles, and elaborate headdresses. The most stunning piece found so far was a headpiece made of over 400 gerbil teeth. That's right, gerbil teeth. Imagine how much effort it would have taken to turn a bunch of minuscule teeth into headwear. With the discovery of the monument and its unique burials of elders buried with infants and women buried alongside men, Lothagam North is a fascinating monument that could reshape the perception of ancient societies. Number 4. Decapitated skeletons. Leave it to modern technology to identify and unlock the genes of more than 80 skeletons found in a Roman cemetery in England. All aged under 45 when they died, the skeletons of 80 individuals were first unearthed a decade ago, but it took until 2016 for their origins to be made clear. Using genome technology, the 1800-year-old skeletons, who were found underneath gardens at Driffield Terrace, were discovered to have Syrians and Palestinians among them. But it isn't their far-flung origins that stunned researchers. It's the fact that most of the men had been decapitated with their skulls tucked between their legs, placed at their feet, or laid on their chests. Found in York, which was once a major outpost on Rome's distant frontier, some of the bodies were linked to people living in modern-day Wales. Many of the skeletons had signs of healed injuries, with a few showing bite marks from a large predator like a lion or bear. But the most stunning discovery was that half of the bodies were decapitated just after they died. So why were they decapitated? Experts believe the site was once a special burial place for those who fought as gladiators in arenas until the late 4th century AD. How did they know that? Well, they seem to have stronger muscles in their right arms, a trait that Roman slaves who trained to fight as gladiators often had. Given the fact that bouts usually ended with a loser being decapitated, the discovery marks the location of the world's best preserved gladiator graveyard. Well, at least they were buried with their heads. Do you think you would have done well as a gladiator? Or would you have been food for the lions and bears? Tell me how you'd try to survive down in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more awesome videos just like this one. Number 3. Palermo catacombs. Mummification isn't just for the ancient Egyptians. It became a well-known practice in Sicily, where the Capuchin catacombs are located. One of the world's most well-known cultural heritage sites, these creepy catacombs of Palermo are the perfect place for fans of the macabre to visit. A cemetery for brothers of the convent of the Capuchin friars, this site is home to countless corpses of people who died between the 17th and 19th centuries. Originally built as a simple cemetery to bury the monks of the monastery, the friars first buried their dead in a mass grave under the altar of St. Anne. As the community grew, the pit quickly became overcrowded, so a larger cemetery was built to transfer the friars already buried. At that time, the friars made a startling discovery. 45 of the bodies had been naturally mummified without decomposing. Believing it was an act of God, the friars decided to display the bodies of their brothers as relics instead of burying the remains. You might think the burials took place in the ancient past, but up until 1782, the convent accepted burials from laypeople, expanding and adding more corridors. Thousands of wealthy citizens and local standout citizens could be buried there. But it wasn't cheap. It took generous donations to afford the mummification process. And later, the bodies were placed on eternal display in special nooks in the underground cemetery. Kind of bizarre, don't you think? Number 2. China's hanging coffins. In the southern Sichuan province of China, you might notice a strange sight when you look up in the opposing cliffs of the Yangtze River. 30 caskets that date back hundreds of years sit anchored to the limestone rocks almost 100 feet in the air. Both inside the coffins and attached to the outside, there are scraps of clothing, bones, and ceramics as tribute to those buried inside. Found across a large area of the remote valleys in central China, the coffins line the cliff face, balanced on wooden stakes or stacked high. The oldest of the coffins date back 3,000 years, but there is no clear explanation for why the dead were placed this way. Some ancient texts say that those placed higher on the cliffs were more devout in their religion, while others are a bit more practical. They say they were just placed there to keep them away from animals. Every year, new sites are discovered, with 131 found in 2015 in the province of Hubei alone. But that doesn't mean experts are any closer to figuring out how the people transported the coffins, the bodies, and all the funeral objects to the cliff caves. One researcher determined to figure out the mystery rappelled down a cliff face to get a closer look at some of the hanging coffins. Most rested on rotting stakes, which required bamboo scaffolding to secure the site before researchers could examine the strange boxes. When they did, they found some of the coffins had multiple bodies in them. Each one was dug out from a single solid piece of wood and packed with sand, which made them incredibly heavy. Even though it might seem like a strange practice, Tibetans and Mongolians practice a different type of sky burial where they offer the bodies of the deceased to vultures or other animals. But cliff burials, also found in the Philippines, are often only accessible by river, making one wonder exactly how the ancient people were able to transport them to these precarious final resting places. But that doesn't mean the coffins aren't targets for looters. At some sites, the coffins have been robbed for their valuable artifacts, including swords and other valuables. As much as researchers try to determine how and why these cliffside burials took place, one may never truly know why a few groups of people adopted this unique practice. Number 1. The Bone Church. If you're a fan of the macabre, the Sedlec Ossuary Bone Church is the place to be. Located in the Czech Republic, the church is made entirely of bones. That seems awfully occult and disturbing, right? 1 hour east of Prague, the cemetery was originally founded in 1142 as the oldest Cistercian monastery. At one point, almost 30,000 people were buried there, mostly victims of epidemics. As it grew in popularity as one of Europe's most sought-after burial places, a Gothic chapel and ossuary were built there too. But one look at the ossuary, the room where the bones of the deceased are kept, and you can see that it's no ordinary place. After a fire destroyed the cathedral and monastery, the bones were removed and stacked for safekeeping. But an architect and woodcarver brought in to recreate the interior of the church had a vision, one that saw them taking the bones of the dead and making something beautiful from them. Bleaching the bones, the woodcarver used them in his own style of macabre art, stringing skulls and bones across entryways. He also created elaborate candelabras and crosses made from femurs. The most striking piece in the place is a massive bone chandelier with skulls as candle holders. Between 40,000 and 70,000 bones make up the interior designs of the church, with visitors allowed to walk freely among the creepy decorations. To keep everything looking in tip-top shape, a specialist comes in periodically to clean every bone on the chapel with a toothbrush. If this site isn't too ghoulish, you can visit the church to marvel at the remains of so many real skeletons used in one man's morbid artistry. Thanks for watching. What was the creepiest ancient place in your opinion? Tell me down in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already, click the bell icon to get notifications, and I will see you next time, right here on Talltanic.